Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting episode of INX webinars. We have Alexandra Damsker, the one and only. Alexandra, you and I, we spoke with 4, 5, 6 other women. I don't remember how many exactly on Women's Month to celebrate Women's Month and talk about women in the industry. But there was a lot of things that we could double click on, focus more on, and we didn't really have time. So I'm happy to have you back one on one so we can, discuss the burning issues at play. And just so you know, like everyone out there, we've been doing these webinars, they live broadcast. We get some people tuning in, but this one specifically, I want to make it a mission to convert into a real YouTube episode, like with all the, you have that like thumbnail of like the shocked face of the candles going up. We might do one of those. So welcome, Alex, or welcome, Alexandra. Why don't you kind of, give us a little bit of background about yourself just to start off, and then we'll get straight into the SEC, straight into, what's happening on the regulation side. We have a lot to cover. So, let's take it from the top.
Sure. I'm Alexandra Damsker. I used to work at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I worked at a big international firm in their New York and Chicago offices. I headed a practice. I had my own practice. I founded 2 companies and exited, and then I moved into blockchain in 2016. And I've been here since. Originally, it was to build a company, but the technology back then was just Bitcoin and Ethereum, and Ethereum was so slow, and I was building a financial marketplace, and we were like, this is not going to happen yet. So we stopped building, and but in the process, I learned so much about operations and the tech itself, along with the regulatory side, that people were asking me to help them with their projects, and then I was being asked to speak, and here we are. I advise a number of companies and high net worth individuals, and obviously INX, and several other entities. I have a book on DeFi that will be coming out that is published by O'Reilly, and I've been speaking internationally for a while. My first speaking engagement, I remember, was a packed audience of 200 people. So crypto's grown enormously since then. And we can't all go for sushi afterwards like we did before. So
ramen.
I know it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot since then, but it's great. I love being here, and I still am encouraging everyone to join. So still doing the same thing.
Cool. I mean, I thought you were going to come with like a humble beginning story of, my first speaking event was with 3 people, but I guess you got, you spoke in the bull market, and I want to be one of the first to read your DeFi book. I'm very, curious. I kind of working on a little book project myself, and it's the fascinating journey to try. Like writing a book is very different to writing, short form or even long form content. It really, it really it's the labor of love in a way. So I'm excited to see what you got going. How much of, that what's happening in today's climate, the SEC coming off the exchanges, I didn't really know you had a book on DeFi. That takes the whole conversation in a different direction. But how do you see it, the SEC's aggressive actions right now? What was the first thing that came to your head? And, what do you think the implication is here for centralized exchanges, DeFi, the ecosystem as a whole?
So I have a lot of thoughts on it. I don't view the SEC as this black box entity, evil monolith, because I know a lot of people there. So it's not like that. A lot of people don't really understand how it works. For the most part, the first thing I thought when these came out was, if everybody runs scared every time the SEC puts out a complaint, we're in deep trouble, because that is what they do. I don't really understand why this continues to have earthquakes in the market when it's yay, they see problems and they're going after people with problems. They've repeatedly indicated that they do not want to shut down crypto. And you can tell. Here's how. Every time they've had an unregistered securities, right, where they've seen an unregistered securities offering, they could have asked for rescission, which is basically a reverse IPO, something like where you have to basically buy back all of the tokens or stock or whatever it is that you sold, and companies don't survive that. They didn't do that. They did fines. So other than the companies that were, for whatever reason, right, couldn't settle or wouldn't settle, those companies are still operating. It's fine. Like, they're just moving on. But for the companies that chose to take this as a personal battle, they are the ones that are still having trouble. So, I think that part of it is that they're ignorant of the other options. They don't know what the universe of options that the SEC even had was. Like, they think that these fines or even the SEC taking notice is the worst thing in the entire world. That isn't it, right? There's a lot worse that could happen that didn't happen. And that's really where I wish this industry would look. Like, it could do worse. It has done worse, but it's not doing worse overall against the industry. And they've repeatedly said, we're not looking to kill this industry. We're looking to bring down the bad actors. And quite frankly, we should be doing the same thing. We should be helping them bring down the bad actors. What we don't like is bringing down the ones that are making money. But our bad actors making money, the people that we want running this space. That's really like the crisis of faith that we're having right now, is that we have a lot of bad actors that have generated revenue and look to us like this sector is growing and have generated revenue for other people, or have generated profits for other people, not revenue, but profits for other people. And then we have to say, is that what our space is? Or is that, or can anybody generate profits? But if you don't generate profits legally, that's not acceptable.
I hear what you're saying about bad actors, and I mean, yeah, as I love your optimism of saying, you're getting kicked, you're getting kicked in the shin, but just be thankful that you didn't get shot in the head. Like, I wasn't even aware of the idea of rescission, and it's interesting to kind of maybe understand why the SEC hasn't really shut down these unregistered crypto asset securities, or why they even haven't come after a lot of them directly. A lot of them have been named in the Coinbase and the Binance suits, and a bunch of other complaints as well. But those crypto assets haven't been targeted directly. So, I do hear what you're saying about the SEC wanting to limit, not kill. So, I think that's an interesting take, and definitely worth considering. But, I think when they let's get into this definition of the security, and like where that line is drawn, and when you're saying like they want to try eliminate bad actors, but on the other hand, Gary Gensler is kind of painting with a very wide brush, saying Bitcoin is not a security. ETH, we're gonna keep. I call it Schrödinger's asset, right? So it's in the box. If you open the box, it might be a security, it might not be, but it kind of exists in a quantum state right now, like it's 0 or 1, and then everything else is a security.
Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think it was Schrödinger's shitcoin, the one that I thought of it originally, but like what everything else is a security. So that's really painting with a very thick brush. And I want to kind of, with your background in securities law, like, do you think that that should be the case, where even L1 tokens like a Matic or on an Algorand or on Avalanche should be securities? And that from then on we'll kind of try and understand, if not securities, then what is this regulatory gap in which they can fit?
So a few things, right? I'm going to go into, I'll talk briefly about what is a security thing, but then I just want to mention that what is a security is the wrong question for the entire industry to be asking. And that is why I want to stay away from that whole question. And that's what's getting us into trouble. Because I want to say that what the SEC is doing right now is understandable. it's not fruitful for us to go after them in like for what they're doing. There's other things that they're doing that are hurting us more. And instead we're battling them on their playground about something that they already know. They get to make the rules, right? They're allowed to say who's a security and who's not. What's a security, right? So with respect to Bitcoin and Ethereum, all we really know is that they're being treated as commodities primarily in that they're being treated in as not securities, right? So what technically they got was their initial offering was not an unregistered securities offering. That's all, right? It's a very circumscribed statement. They are being treated as though they are commodities. So that doesn't mean that they're not regulated. They're being treated as though they are supposed to be commodities. But really, what does that mean? That means right now that Bitcoin can only be offered in futures, right? They're regulated futures. That's why these ETFs are in futures. There's a whole discussion about why ETFs can only be futures contracts. And I don't think these spot market ETFs are even going to happen. But and then the same thing with ETH, right? ETH is being treated also as a commodity. That's what we have right now, for better or worse. Whether or not there's not even a clear statement that says ETH is a commodity, Bitcoin is a commodity. There's like a general idea that like Bitcoin is basically oil, you know, and so it should be treated like a commodity, but there's not a clear statement that that's what it is. So, but given that that's better treatment for Bitcoin and ETH, we have to look at the fact that Bitcoin may have blown its exemption, unfortunately. And that is problematic because people keep creating stuff without understanding why something may or may not be exempt, and then wondering why it becomes problematic. And for this, I'm talking about the ordinals. Ordinals took something that was exempt because each sat was by definition identical to another sat, right? That was the whole premise of this thing. And they made unique sats. And these sats are not valued equally. And I'm not sure when this is going to come to the attention of the SEC, but I have no doubt that it will. And this is going to be problematic. I do wish that someone had considered this before saying, hey, this is cool, let's try it. But that's going to be an issue. And, you know, Ethereum is now talking about doing these inscriptions as well. Once again, problematic. So it's like the technology itself is this wonderful thing that we need to promote and protect. And then we have a bunch of people who keep trying to screw it up. And that makes me very frustrated because what they're doing is saying, well, this works, let's just pile on top of it. And it's like, but you don't know why it works. So when you're piling on top of it, are you leaning on the one thing that makes it work and breaking it? And that is super problematic. Like, people think if I can just recreate the entire ETH ecosystem on Bitcoin, suddenly we have a whole thing where that's not regulated, but that's not true. There's a lot of thoughts I have on this. I don't want to get
there's a lot to unpack there. I think you should be a featured speaker on like an ordinal maxi debate. We had that a while ago. It was very fun.
Yeah, not in person.
I've never actually considered that angle. We kind of just went like this. We spoke about, you know, the classic debate of, you know, Bitcoin being used as money and ordinals clogging up the chain. But right. I think one guy might have mentioned in passing the idea of it being a security. But what you're actually saying, and then you mentioned ETH, you know, inscriptions, and ETH already has NFTs in other form of an ERC 721. But you're actually saying that NFTs, unique one-of-one digital collectibles, that could be next. That could be, you know, under the SEC's microscope after it
Not
away with
NFTs.
crypto asset securities.
Not NFTs. I believe that the idea is to be able to inscribe something like an ERC20. So inscribe actual transactional ETH,
Okay.
which destroys the purpose of, that sort of
Yeah.
transactional loophole, right? So these are problematic things. We have to think about these things before we do it. This is like something that maybe it's because I'm a mother, but I just want to say, can you think before you do it? Think first. Think first, and then do it.
What are you doing with that security in your hand? Put it down.
What do you do? Put it down. Put it down slowly. Crazy Clue isn't going to fix this. So, I'm just, this is the kind of stuff that concerns me because we're so eager to try and do new things. And part of it is during a bull market, people are rushing to try and capture money that comes into the space. And that's actually what's gotten us into trouble right now. So right now, the SEC is focusing on these 2017 to 2020 builds. We expected it. Each group of lawsuits that come out is going to be a different era and focusing on different problems. So this is basically because we essentially have Web 2 builds that have a Web 3 port attached to it. Like you could put a Web3 wallet into it. So a lot of these builds are fraudulent builds, right? Like we shouldn't try to pretend that they're not. Who thinks that, Binance is decentralized or could be? There's nothing in there that makes you think that it's like I don't even know why everybody adores it so much, to be honest, other than it's cheap. It doesn't really represent the tenets of blockchain, right? This idea of decentralization, of people owning, these assets or whatever. Like, what is this? It's a very secretive, multi-affiliate project. Nobody really knows where it's based or where it's held. We all know that essentially it's all controlled by one person. And we love our idols, right? We love these individuals who raise a crap ton of money and hold a crap ton of money and then can lose a crap ton of money. They buy a bunch of projects, they centralize them, and then they can destroy them, right? This is what SBF was. And we just like the idea of basically these men coming in and being able to be like leaders of the world. And I think that's very harmful and damaging. I think we should be just as suspicious of the people who are running these projects as we are of the people who are running companies in the non-crypto world. Why are we more forgiving of people that we demand less transparency from people just because they're in the crypto space? I don't understand that. To me, we should have a greater demand. You want my money? You need to tell me what you're doing. People have this ridiculous trust, like this guy who, put his personal email out and said, I did this with this other coin. I'm going to issue another meme coin. And here's my address. People sent him $7 million. And then they were surprised that it was a scam. They're not, people are not asking questions. They're not demanding anything. They're just putting money into these things and then wondering why regulators are not on top of this stuff. It's like, how does anybody stop you from giving your money to somebody when it looks like a terrible idea? Do you want someone to literally hold your hand and say, don't do that? Mommy said no. I'm not really entirely sure how this is supposed to happen. Regulators don't do that. I mean, even Coinbase didn't understand what the SEC did when they went through the IPO process. They're like, well, you approved us. The SEC's like, what the hell? Do you even know what happened when you went through an IPO? We don't approve you. We didn't approve your process. We don't approve your exchange. That's not even an exchange. So I'm not entirely sure what people are expecting from anyone in the space, right? But on one hand, they want a lot of freedom. And on the other hand, they want a lot of protection. And it doesn't work that way. You have to have really one or the other. You want a lot of freedom and access, then I think we need to push for that. But at the same time, we need to make sure people understand there's a huge amount of risk involved, right?
Yeah. I want to kind of take the counter to that, because, for sure, I think there's a lot of idolization of these mythical decentralized figures that aren't really decentralized, and at the expense of common sense, due diligence, transparency, all the things that we think we value, in the Web3 crypto space. But actually, it's just all talk. But I think on the other side of that, obviously self-regulation in the industry hasn't really gone very far. But the other side of that is that we hear of Gary Gensler, we hear the SEC saying that we're doing this for investor protection, we're doing that for investor protection. But the investors, what you're protecting me from being able to make money, and like there has to be that balance on the other side as well. Like I know in Israel, for example, here's a crazy stat: like you need like $10,000 to open a brokerage account, like a stock brokerage account, and that's kind of the same principle. We're protecting investors when, in the actual fact, you're just preventing anyone who doesn't have 10 grand lying around from investing in the stock market. So there is that other side where, it's like, it's done a little bit more for control than for protection, as well.
But this is the core issue, right? And this is my problem fundamentally with all of the companies that are getting sued, that want the regular retail people they want everyone, they want us to throw our bodies in front of them, and for us to fight their fight. They don't want to register because why? They don't want to pay the money. They don't want to wait the time. They don't want the oversight, and they don't want the liability. All those things are on them. That's not on me as an investor. That's not me. That's them. That does nothing to help me. That does only, what they want is for me to take my time, my money, my body, my safety, and put it in front of them to protect them. If they want me to fight their fight better be something for me. And what is the only fight that actually matters when it comes to actually giving people access? None of it is about this, making it easier for people to access markets. Everybody has the same rules when it comes to registering. Registering isn't the issue. The big issue right now is the accredited investor rule, and it always has been. The idea for the accredited investor rule is essentially not that if you're wealthy enough, you're smart enough to make good decisions. That's never been the idea. It's an idea that came from the Depression, which is if you have enough money, if you're going to risk money, when you lose it, you won't be on the government dole, right? You won't have to take money from the state and from the federal government. That's what we're looking for. And that whole concept has essentially resulted in this huge bifurcation between the wealthy and the poor, because the number one way that is assured, or most assured, right, the safest way for people to gain wealth is to enter into private deals before they become public. Why? Because that's where the greatest growth is, where you can diversify your wealth. And the time period between entering into your investment and the exit event is less than a third of the time. It's less than a fourth of the time of public companies. So the difference is essentially, if you run an operating company, your chances of succeeding are less than 10%. If you want to invest in the public stock market, it takes you 40 years to gain any sort of wealth. If you invest in private companies before they go public, the average is 7 years versus 40. And this is the big difference. And so what does the SEC say? You can't get involved in public companies or private companies before they go public because you're not rich enough. But you can't get rich because you can't get involved in these private companies. But you can't get involved in private companies because you're not rich. But you can't get rich because you're not involved. See how this works?
That's where crypto comes in. You can get in on some pre-sale action before it hits the main event.
Right, but that's what they're saying.
A lot of retail people involved.
Yeah, but that's what they're saying is you shouldn't be able to do that. But instead of saying, I don't want to register because of my liability or things like that, instead, what they should say is take away the wall of the accredited investors. put a door there instead. Say, unless you do X, Y, and Z, then you can pass into this area. Nobody cares if somebody has no idea what they're getting into. This is the big problem, right? There's not an idea that the SEC is actually has some sort of rule saying that only good companies get registered. No, there's a lot of crap that are stock companies and crypto companies. There's crap out there. The SEC doesn't care if you're a good company or not. You just have to disclose. The SEC doesn't care if investors know what they're doing. There isn't even a requirement to read a prospectus. So what is the difference between somebody who is a retail investor and an accredited investor, right? Is basically whether or not you have enough money. But if you're allowed to take the money that you have and buy a ton of chocolate and then leave it in the street and melt it, then why are you not allowed to get involved in a risky company the same way? You're allowed to use your money however you want. There isn't a control on the amount of money that you can spend in other fashions. So this system isn't actually preventing people from using their money poorly. There's nothing in the system that does that. So if you want to basically say this is riskier than buying a bunch of chocolate and letting it sit in the street, I'm not sure how, but let's say the government says this is riskier than doing that. Okay, what is the way to remove some of that risk? Education. Say here, take this class, and then you go. Take an open book test. There's never a reason for a closed book test anyway. Whoever cares that you looked up something when you answer a question in life, right? I think closed book tests in general are stupid. But then they should put a way for every single person who wants to put the effort into understand about risk and risk mitigation. There should be a way for them to access all of these private companies, whether they're crypto or not. And if any company wants to go make that the reason that they don't want to register, or that's the reason they want to fight the SEC, I'm 100% behind that. But don't make it about whether or not they have to register because they don't want the liability. Everyone has to deal with that issue. If you want to fight the SEC, make it for something that makes a difference. Not just, I don't want to register because I don't want the liability, I don't want the cost, I don't want whatever. Every single person has to deal with that. Every company has to deal with that in every industry. There's nothing special about crypto that should prevent them from having to deal with the same issues. There's nothing special about it. So it should have to deal with the same problems that tech has to deal with or industry has to deal with. There's nothing better. There's nothing particularly special about it. But if we want to actually make a change and make it possible for people to access wealth that they've never been able to access before, then we should actually make some significant changes. And this is one of the big ones.
So you're saying, the symptom is all these not wanting to register because you're listing coins that you don't want to, that SEC doesn't really like. But the real cause is this exclusionary wall of accredited investor rules, and the lobbying. All the effort should be on treating the cause, not trying to patch up the system with band-aids. And I want to kind of go back to what you said about when the accredited investor rule came about. Like, I didn't really know that, but it makes sense that I saw those black and white images of the food lines in the Depression era, and I could imagine the government didn't really want, I think it was FDR at the time, he didn't really want more people joining that food line. So it makes sense, but that's also around the time when the Securities Act was enacted, So I want to kind of go back to the assets as opposed to the companies and the players. And, crypto assets, securities, we've talked about them a bit, everything that isn't Bitcoin and Ethereum. William Hinman, director of the SEC, America loves a good email scandal. And we had another one this week with the director of SEC's email came out, and I'll read a quote from that. Tokens on a sufficiently decentralized network are no longer securities, creating a regulatory gap. Now, this ties in also to Hester Pierce had an idea about what she called the safe harbor. So I'm trying to, wondering what your take and, what you gathered from your conversations over there about the path forward for, perhaps there's a middle ground, there's some sort of a no man's land that we can define, just like loyalty points and airline miles and all these other assets were given, exemption from being securities and put into a different category. Is there some sort of, obviously I still think 90% are securities. Like I know some of them have no utility, but the ones that really are sufficiently decentralized, as Director Hinman claims, what's your thoughts on having that the third way, so securities, commodities, and a new concept, a new bucket into which certain assets will fall?
Okay, so Hinman was the director of a division, corporation finance. Incidentally, the same division I was in, and not of the SEC, right? So a particular division. This was a speech he gave in 2018. He doesn't make policy. He was giving his own personal views. He had the SEC review it because that's just standard policy. He had legal, to make sure that he wasn't doing anything illegal because he was employed there. And they gave their thoughts, which I think again show that I think we're all asking, we're talking to the SEC and we're talking about the wrong things. But I think that asking, is it a securities? It's a no-win. Well, I don't know why we keep focusing on it, but the decentralization argument, that was his idea. It didn't go anywhere. Doesn't matter at all. Hester Peirce talks a lot outside of the commission because, with all due respect, she has no real power within it, right? She has people know her, she's respected and liked, but honestly, the reason that a lot of people talk outside of an institution is because they don't have their voice heard within it, and her suggestions are not being taken up. She'll have a very nice position once she leaves in somewhere in the industry, but these are not being taken up as something in the industry, right? This is not what's going to happen in the industry. This is her idea of a safe harbor. The idea is, here's the problem. Somebody early on, I think it was a VC, who told developers, you can sell these tokens and they're not securities and you don't have to register them and you can use them to build your product. And none of that is true. And we love that lie. We love it. We hold it tight. We sleep with it. We pat it. We love that. And it doesn't mean anything. It's completely false. No other industry has that idea that you can sell a security for capital raising and you don't have to register it. Why did we decide that was, and I used to get booed at these early ones. I was like, that's not true. These ICOs, that's crap. The SAFTs, those are illegal. And everybody's like, boo, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, go ahead. And then they're like, it's illegal. And I'm like, okay, you're right. So, it's very clear to me. And I think what we have first is, I say this over and over again, a bunch of terrible lawyers. There are terrible lawyers in this space. There are terrible securities lawyers. There are terrible, people who are lazy and not doing the work of making sure they understand the gestalt of this. They have to it takes a lot of work to work in crypto, and you have to be on top of a bunch of different areas. And they're trying to learn on the dime of a client. And the truth is that you got to figure it out on your own dime. And then when clients come, they can't pay for all of the learning that you need. They're not going to. It's too expensive. So there's just a lot of people out there who think they know what they're talking about and they don't. And because they say what a lot of clients like to hear, people take that as advice. And then they get in trouble, and then they get mad, and then they blame the regulators. And it's like, you know what? This was entirely 100,000% predictable. And you were just
so you're not giving out legal opinions that the token is not a security in any time soon.
Oh, a lot of people are giving out these opinions that they're, it's legal. What was it? XRP, I think, had 13 legal opinions. 12 of them said it's a security. The 13th one was like, it's not a security. They're like, that's it. That's the one we're going to take. So, look, part of it is that there's, a lot of really bad advice out here. Part of it is that people here, especially in the earlier days, a lot of people didn't care if they were compliant. They just kind of assumed that they could get away with it. I still hear people say, we don't need law or regulation. We have blockchain. Blockchain can lie. I don't understand why people don't realize that. So yes, you need regulation, right? If someone hacks you and the transaction says that they purchased something from you when they didn't, that is not a true record of what happened, right? That they stole it from you. So, I mean, there's a lot that is a misguided belief. Someone told me, very outraged, well, what are we supposed to do? Because we need money to build this stuff. And I said, oh, you're right. Only blockchain needs money to build a product. There are no other industries where getting funds and fundraising in advance of building is an issue. And I was like, what do you think securities law was before crypto? It's literally all trying to raise money in order to build a product. That's everybody. That's everybody. So why should we be exempt from these rules? I don't hear an argument that's compelling, right? I'm very moved by fairness. And as much as I think, this is a wonderful technology, it's just a technology. I don't think that, any of these particular companies falling down is going to make the industry any weaker. It's not. It's the technology still exists. The technology doesn't rely on Binance being here or Coinbase or any of that. Like, the technology exists. It doesn't rely on a particular, project existing. So those are things that I think people are so worried about particular projects existing. They're not worried about what happens to investors. They're not thinking long-term. We are not thinking long-term in communities, in projects, in regulations. We are not thinking long-term. We are very defensive, short-term strategy thinkers. And that has been hurting us over and over and over again. So again, I don't think that this issue of figuring out whether or not we should comply is an issue, right? Our better question is, and has always been, okay, we should comply. How?
Yeah.
Our biggest problem has always been how. How do I comply with the counterparty rule when my counterparty is an alphanumeric code with a kitty NFT in it? Go ahead, make that person report. That's the other party. That's what the IRS likes. They like to match things. Go ahead, find that person. How do you do that? How am I supposed to do this reporting? I'm not a broker, right? I don't have broker knowledge, right? I don't have knowledge of the reporting requirements. How am I supposed to fulfill the transaction requirements when I don't have access to the information that those requirements entail? And that is because the requirements are built around the central conceit that everything operates on broker-dealers. And that hasn't been true since the 90s. And that is the fundamental problem with the rules. It doesn't work for us, but it doesn't work for anyone. So we're asking this question of, is this a security? Is that a security? Who cares? The SEC is the one that gets to say yes or no. Why do we even ask that? We should be asking instead, okay, it's a security. How do we comply? Go ahead, tell us how. And
I want to kind of double down on that. If I kind of, sum up your thesis, is that the SEC has some inefficiencies, some things that can be changed, some, structural deficiencies, but they're not unique to crypto. And we're focusing on the wrong battle because we're trying to make it like an us versus them, like establishment, anti-establishment thing, as opposed to uniting with any capital formation entities and trying to change the credit investor law, trying to change, the broker-dealer setup. But I want to kind of focus on that, now say this is a security, and we're talking here on the INX background, and we're, actively putting into play security token capital raises with the right legal regulatory framework. But the crypto tokens that aren't, and this is the last I'll mention the securities thing. I just have to, because that's what the SEC made so clear in their prospectus. That was coming up in the conversations that we're having in our community. For those securities that are securities, for the cryptos that are securities, how do you see them let's say I'm the issuer of Dogecoin or Matic or Polygon. How can I, through the SEC, what path do I have to go legit?
So this was super interesting, right? You're talking about the Coinbase and the Binance complaints where they could have just listed the unregistered securities offerings with the coins affiliated with the token, with the exchange, right? BNB coin, and been done with it, right? And they even went through and said, hey, you offer this and this is illegal and this is an unregistered security, and left it at that, but they didn't. They brought in other coins, a weird collection of them, right? Some of them major projects, some of them rando tiny things, some of them overlap, some of them don't. And they made the case that they were unregistered securities. And then they said, and here's what you're doing with them that's illegal, that is creating a new illegal security transaction. So it was basically saying, you're fencing stolen diamonds. And everybody says, wait, what? Stolen diamonds? Where are the stolen diamonds from? Who are they stolen from? Where are they now? And everybody's like, and the SEC saying, no, don't pay attention to the stolen diamonds. These people are fencing them. And everybody wants to know about the diamonds. And the SEC says, disregard the stolen diamonds. We're only talking about the fact that this company is fencing stolen diamonds. So we're talking about the fencing alone. So it's kind of weird, right? Where they talk about these stolen diamonds exist and then completely remove them from consideration in terms of liability or what happened with them, or join those defendants in these complaints. So that was what was super weird, is that none of these projects were added as defendants, right? All they are listed. And then more than that, it wasn't even the fact that these are unregistered securities that is the reason that they were listed. What they showed is the unregistered security transaction that was conducted by the exchange relating to that particular token. So it wasn't like you listed Sol. It was like you did a lend program on Sol, right? And the lend program created a securities transaction on Sol. So it was a very strange thing. That was the first thing I talked about, was like, what are they doing with these? This is very strange. So I do wonder, I have a couple of ideas of why they picked the ones that they picked. I do think they're heading for DeFi soon, and that this is one of their heads up on this. And in order for these companies to basically be compliant, they'd have to register. They really would need to register their tokens. Now, the question is, can you register after the fact? What can you do after these shares have been issued? Traditionally, this has not been possible, right? That's never been something that the SEC has considered. There's been no remedy for it. Once you issue it, if it's unregistered securities, they're all mixed together, and that's why you have to do a rescission. But the SEC's been saying, you know what, you did it. It's operating. The registered securities are out there along with unregistered one. No, they're all unregistered and they're all out there, and we're not going to make you take them back. We're just going to make you pay a fine and not do that again, right? Which I don't really understand how that works. But I would say they need to start preparing arguments, assuming that a complaint will come. What else can they do? There isn't a lot you can do after the fact. That's the problem, right? Everything that you can do happens before your first offering. And there's a lot you can do before your first offering. But after the fact, it's tougher. What do? You want to rescind all of your own tokens? That could kill projects. So it's a very tough thing. I think we would need an indication that the SEC really wanted these companies to come in and say, okay, we've done these offerings. We want to rectify this situation. Now, at this point, considering the antagonism between the industry and the SEC, there's no way I would recommend going in right now. And remember that all of the conversations that you have with the SEC, you should have a really skilled lawyer with you, because they're taking all of that information. It's not like, well, just between you and me.
Anything you say can and will be used against you. 100%. Yeah.
So people think it's like talking to a VC with an NDA, and it's like, nope, that's not what you're doing. So you got to know what you're doing and who you're talking to. And but, I think that there's a path forward here, but it needs to be done, I guess, delicately. I think we all need to rethink our approach. I think there is a path forward for crypto, but it involves us coming together, creating a piece of legislation, bringing it forward, and bringing in all of these parties in a more unified manner, and then saying, look, we want to come forward and clean up. We need to know what the path to do that is, and what the consequences are if we don't. And then saying, look, this is how we have to operate in the future. Here is the legislation that we'd like to propose. Because right now, all the legislation that's been proposed, and I've literally gone over all of it and broken it down, and most of it is terrible. And it impacts industries besides ours. And most of it just shows that the Congress is just not, they don't have people who really understand crypto and regulation. I'm not really sure how they're getting their information, but they're very slow to put out bills. And a lot of these bills just have no beneficial impact to the industry overall. And we know that a bunch of new regulations are coming in because 200 jurisdictions are going to be required to bring in these new regulations. Europe is already starting to comply. And we can actually be the people who bring in this new regulation and say, look, this is compliant. This will work with our technology. This makes sense. This keeps bad actors out. It protects interests, but it also allows our technology to function the way we need it to function. So I think that there is a path forward, but it requires more goodwill on both of our sides than I think currently exists. It requires sort of a unification of interest between the Bitcoin and other chain maxis and the rest of the crypto community. And it requires us to, cohesively come together and actually draft legislation that makes sense.
That's that's very powerful, but in short, it's impossible. You want to bring everyone together, bring the crypto maxis together with the altcoiners, together with Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren. It's a fanciful notion, but I want to ask you, maybe the stars will align in a different way. Like, Congressman Davidson, he's become one of the more pro-crypto vocal voices, and he actually wants to get rid of Gensler. So, what do you think of that kind of pro-crypto movement happening now in Washington? Do you see that maybe changing things up for this legislative push that you would like to witness emerging in the U.S.? Is that something that could happen?
I find that dangerous. I don't like. So Gensler is part of the executive branch. He was appointed by the president. He serves at the leisure of the president. It is not the call of the legislative branch to get involved with the executive branch. We've seen a lot of overreach between the legislative branch trying to manipulate the executive branch, and also overreach by the Supreme Court, right? I don't like that. I think that the only thing that keeps any government in check are boundaries. And we have legal boundaries, right? And legal boundaries are really like what we know about all rights is they're only as valuable as what you're willing to do to protect them. So the resources that you're willing to put behind to make sure that those boundaries stay enforced. And right now, it doesn't really matter if someone is acting in a way that you like. You have to think about what about if that action were against someone that, like, what if it was against someone or what if it was an action that you didn't like? Would you still support it? Because people think in terms of, do I like this action Do I like the consequences of this specific action? That's not, I think, the way to think of these kinds of things. What I think of is, if this action happens, does it set a precedent that erodes the separation of checks and balances? Does it create more power in one branch than another? Does it erode the power of the Constitution? Does it create some set of rights that shouldn't exist, that now exist simply because someone took those rights? Because remember, generally speaking, when rights are taken, at the end of the day, the rights that get taken are the rights of the people. And that is not okay. So, once it becomes easy to start overriding rights, at the end of the day, whose rights get overridden? The rights of the people. So I'm very, very firm that I don't want legislators to determine what happens in the executive branch. Whether I like the person or not doesn't matter. Not my call, not their call, right? I don't want that happening at all. I don't want the executive branch determining what happens in the legislative branch or the Supreme Court. Very, very, very important to maintain those boundaries. So absolutely no.
Interesting. Checks and balances are, I mean, we won't get into that, but that's very much at the core of a raging debate over here in Israel as well. I think we're towards the end, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Republic deal that we want to call earlier. We discussed that, but I want to get your reaction on that. But I have to know, what would be the lamppost, the crowning piece of, if Alexandra had to draft the crypto bill of 2023 to push through the two houses of Congress, like what would be the cornerstone of that bill?
If I had to push forward a bill, so it wouldn't be about crypto per se, right? It would be about rights. So the first thing I would do is change the accredited investor rule. The next thing that I would do is change the rules in terms of settlement and transactions, so that they no longer reflect a system that is primarily antiquated, right? Also, I would create, ideally, right? I'd create a system of financial education. What is the other thing aside from the accredited investor rule that keeps the poor and the rich divided? Education, right? If you don't teach something in school, how do people learn it? If you have Uncle Joe that works the trading desk at Citi, he can say, come on over, let me show you the last $10 million deal we did. You can look at the financial statements. I'll show you how it works. If the person that is closest to you is saying, I don't know, my retirement plan is that I'm going to work and then hopefully die soon afterwards, or I have no idea how money works, but I can tell you where to get food when the check runs out before the end of the month, then that is the financial education that you have. So if you want to actually make strides in recreating a middle class, then education is the thing that allows flow between the poor and the rich. The other thing is, our economic system is primarily backwards, right? We have still this idea from the 1980s where if you give money to the wealthy, right, that stimulates the economy. But we all know that is the wealthy are not the people who stimulate the economy. Money rests with the wealthy. It doesn't start with the wealthy into the economy. Who generates economic stimulus? Money to the poor and middle class, right? You can't keep money in your hands if you're poor or middle class, right? You have to pay for rent or mortgage and your utilities and your food and education and all sorts of stuff. You have to pay for these things. You have no choice. So money in the hands of the poor and middle class actually stimulate the economy, whereas money in the hands of the wealthy do not, right? It slows the economy down. And we have had this reverse understanding of the economy for decades. And it has had a detrimental impact on everything from schooling and the amount of money that we have in taxes and the amount of money that we have available for Social Security and things like that, all of that stuff. It's had a detrimental impact on the economy overall. And you can actually see how the reverse worked when we had a momentary stimulus in the hands of the poor and middle class with COVID, right? What happened? The economy sped up. That is what happens when you put money in the hands
maybe
of
a little too much.
Right. Well,
Maybe a little, yeah.
Not necessarily, right? So this is actually I mean, my bill would not necessarily be focused on crypto. My bill would be focused on understanding economics, understanding rights, and how can we actually create an economic system where we don't all have the same outcome, but we all have access to the same starting point. And that I think is doable. It's just you have to have the will to do it. And most people, are owned by someone, I think.
Yeah, it's look, I can definitely get with you on education being the cornerstone of the bill. I think it's it's not things they teach in school. There, for some reason, whoever designed the school system has an incentive of having you learn, useless facts and doing closed book tests as opposed to knowing, what compound interest is or how inflation works or just even the basics of money. Like, I read a lot about Bitcoin, and I remember like getting into Bitcoin and like understanding how dollars get minted into the economy through debt. Treasuries being bought and then money printing, and it just blew my mind. Like you kind of have this kind of feeling, almost it's like a gut feeling that money is something intrinsically valuable as you grow up, and then the bubble just pops when you realize that it's not. It's just a shared figment of our imagination, where Jerome Powell just puts zeros on the balance sheet, and then that money goes a little bit more to the wealthy than it does to the poor. So I think just knowing that is already a step forward, already a step empowering, and that's already one step closer to getting to Bitcoin. And there's a lot of talk around the dollar's role in global economy at the moment kind of sliding, but I think at the core of it is definitely education. We're toward the end. I want to kind of hear what what are your thoughts about the Republic INX strategic partnership? How do you see it playing out? Because I think you're seeing a lot of the BlackRocks of the world starting to warm their engines. But Bitcoin ETF, custody license application, they're acting on a number of fronts. So how do you see the INX and Republic strategic partnership fitting into this landscape?
I mean, I think it's a good thing. Again, biased because I'm an advisor for INX, so I'm not, I can't say that I'm a completely unbiased person, but I think it's a really good thing. I think it's another way for people to end up having an asset that can actually then be traded, so it can become a liquid asset. So it's bringing more people into the crypto universe, but also for those who are using stock, it's actually another way to make this liquid. I mean, Republic is not an exchange, so having an asset that you can actually trade. This is really what crypto, I think, underneath everything is the biggest asset that the biggest driver of what it can do. So one of the reasons I love DeFi is that it is going to revolutionize finance, and that is really decentralized finance without banks. And what can crypto really do is really make assets, because what are NFTs and a lot of these tokens that are being created, they're really just rights, assets and rights. And the ability to take any asset or any right and turn it into something that can be collateralized or monetized is enormously powerful for so many people who don't have access to traditionally collateralized rights or are subject to predatory lending practices, right? So I see the future of this as the way to create a much more equitable financial method that isn't about pawn shops, right? Or reverse mortgages or payday loans and things like that. Those predatory practices, subprime mortgages, all of those things where you've got an intermediary who is telling you that the value of your asset is significantly lower than it is in order to gain access to that asset, and then increasing the interest rate so high that it's impossible for you to pay off your loan. So essentially you end up selling your asset super cheaply. And this is a way for you to actually gain access to financing without either letting go of your asset or by selling your asset for a fair price and being able to use the money without actually having to repay a loan from the financing you received. You sell from the profits of the sale, not from the financing. So there's just some incredible revolutions I think that can happen. I'm very excited with like broadening the platform, adding people from Republic, which is a great, crowdfunding platform, adding more people, getting more people into the space, getting more people to understand that any asset you have can be turned into the ability to earn money is, I think, a good thing.
That's if I'm being real for a second, I think you've forced me to kind of look on a different light at a lot of my assumptions, and I'll explain in a moment. But I think that DeFi, like I talk a lot about compliant DeFi, whatever. I have an opportunity, kind of wrapping tokens. You're seeing it a little bit. There's a platform called Ondo Finance that lets you collateralize treasuries, tokenize treasuries, take out loans. So I think that's definitely the next step. And you can't wait for a Uniswap with security token type of DApp, because then you have, retail can be market makers. Market makers, liquidity providers, they take both sides of the trade, and they make bank with all the fees and all the volume that flows through. But that's been, again, something gated wall for institutions, for big players. Now anyone with a few coins can become a market maker, and there's obviously impermanent loss and there's some complexities over there, but the concept of being able to give your assets and lend them, so to speak, add to the smart contract for liquidity and then make some yield from that is something that could also bring equitable for financial future. But I think where I have felt a little bit challenged, and I think I try to see the world in a different place, is that we've started off a conversation talking about people idealizing these gods of crypto who purport to support decentralization, but are really just engaging in like bad faith business practices, obscure business practices to pump their wallets. And on the other hand, their supporters are trying to rail against the government overreach and the system and the SEC, and that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be us against the government, or us against the SEC or Bitcoin. It should be us against the natural tendency to resist change, whether it's the accredited investor law, the broker dealer, or change, or education, to resist change that keeps people back from flourishing. And the technology that underpins Bitcoin, Ethereum, crypto assets, plus a regulatory framework that is holistic, that people have developed, in a united way, that could get us there in a way that just blockchain on its own, the Wild West, code is law, cannot. And for that, I think that probably sums up where we're at, and that's kind of my head as well. Right now, I think it's the more I see it, the more I realize how crucial regulation is as a component over here. How we're all in it. We all want the same thing at the end of the day. Most of us, except for some lobbying and some some people but most of us want the same thing in the end of the day. We want to prosper. We want our families to prosper. We want the world around us to prosper, because if everyone else around us prospers, they have less angst and anger and violence and anxiety, and then our lives are better. And even if our lives aren't better, it's just as utilitarians, we want the good for the most people. So thank you for an enlightening conversation. I'm sure we'll have many more, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It was very fun.